Ex-rapper Belandra Shaw sworn in as Nepal's new prime minister. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio joins G7 Foreign Ministers Summit in France. And shipwreck claims 9 lives in Djibouti. This is the World News on AIT. I am Onoshorena Obozege. You're welcome. Rapper turned politician Belandra Shah has been sworn in as Nepal's prime minister after a landslide victory in the country's first election since last year's youth-led protest. The 35-year-old's rise marks an important shift in Nepali politics. His promise of change resonated with an electorate that was angry at corruption, nepotism, and elite rule. And U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met his group of 7 counterparts in France on Friday after U.S. President Donald Trump attacked NATO countries over a reluctance or refusal to take part in the Iran war. Rubio will have a hard time trying to sell the other top diplomat from G7 countries on the U.S. strategy for the Iran conflict, to which almost all nations have raised objections. And South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has downplayed report that his invitation to the forthcoming G7 summit in France has been withdrawn, saying that non-attendance by a country outside the bloc should surprise no one. Reports on Thursday claimed that the U.S. had put huge pressure on France to rescind Ramaphosa's invitation to the summit scheduled for June. They claimed U.S. President Donald Trump had threatened to boycott the summit if the South African leader attended. France has, however, denied yielding to any U.S. pressure, saying it had decided to invite Kenya this time. France, which holds the presidency of the group of 7 G7 industrialized nations, said on Thursday it would host leaders from South Korea and 3 other non-member countries, India, Brazil, and Kenya, at its annual summit in Evian-les-Bains. It said the invitations were part of efforts to correct global economic imbalances. A South African official said it had been excluded from the summit after initially being invited, citing sustained pressure from the U.S. But a few hours later, Ramaphosa said that according to his information, there had been no pressure from any country. The sound of a crying child is a sign of hope in a crowded displacement camp in southern Somalia. The most malnourished children are too weak to even cry. For the mothers in Laden camp in the town of Dulo, survival is the only thing on their minds, not the Iran war or how UNICEF gets the supplies to keep the place running. The displaced here have fled the drought that has ravaged swaths of this Horn of African nation after 4 failed rain seasons. Aid workers at Leiden says the raging war in the Middle East, more than 3,000 kilometers away, has made their work harder, disrupting supplies and sending fuel costs soaring.
UNICEF says it has $15.7 million worth of life-saving supplies, including therapeutic food, vaccines, and mosquito nets in transit or being prepared for delivery to Somalia. But those shipments are now uncertain. During a visit to Dalu on Wednesday, Catherine Rosse, UNICEF's executive director, said the Iran war has been a shock to the system for agencies' work on the ground in Somalia. At the same time, more than 400 health and nutrition facilities have closed over the past year across Somalia, due mainly to U.S.-funded cuts, leaving many communities without access to support. Aid agencies warn more closures could follow. In Mogadishu, Somalia's capital, the government warned last month that nearly 6.5 million people out of the population of more than 20 million face severe hunger as the drought worsens and conflict and global aid cuts intensify the country's crisis. The humanitarian needs are just the tip of the iceberg as the Somali government grapples with its long-running war against Al-Qaeda links Al-Shabaab militant group fighting to reclaim territory from the extremists. The latest data from a report by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, a global hunger monitoring group, estimates that 1.84 million children under the age of 5 in Somalia are expected to suffer acute malnutrition in 2026. At the hospital in Dalo, mothers sat shoulder to shoulder on narrow beds holding frail children, some too weak to cry, while others let out soft whimpers. At Ladin's Nutrition Center, health workers weighed children and dispensed a peanut-based paste, squeezing it into the children's mouths. It's a lifetime, a means to prevent rapid decline of the malnourished children, according to a nurse, Abidamajin Adin Hussein.
And tuk-tuk drivers in Somalia are being forced off the roads as rising fuel prices linked to the Iran conflict squeeze livelihoods. In Mogadishu, drivers say higher fuel costs have led to increased fares, driving away passengers and sharply reducing daily earnings. The Iran is tied to disruptions in oil shipment through the Strait of Hormuz, a key global supply route affecting fuel availability and prices. With costs surging and incomes falling, the situation is worsening hardship in a country where millions already face severe hunger. And at least 9 people have died and 45 others remain missing after a migrant boat capsized off the coast of Djibouti, the International Organization for Migration said. The incident occurred on the night of March 24th near the northern coastal area of Umbok, with about 320 passengers reportedly on board at the time. Authorities have not confirmed the vessel's origin or destination, though the route is commonly used by migrants traveling from the Horn of Africa towards the Middle East. The IOM says such journeys are increasingly dangerous as thousands attempt the crossing each year in search of work, particularly in Gulf countries. A smoke was seen rising in southern Lebanon on Friday near the coastal city of Tyre as Israel continued to trade fire with Hezbollah. Israeli military has called for mass evacuations and sent ground troops deeper into Lebanon. Its leaders have hinted at a long-term occupation modeled on the devastating conquest of much of Gaza after Hamas' October 7, 2023 attacks.
For a month, Iran has been at war with the United States and Israel, who had been carrying out strikes across the country at targets linked to the regime. But these attacks are also having a devastating impact on civilians living nearby. They are now being caught between bombardment from the skies and a repressive regime that responded to anti-establishment protests with a deadly crackdown in January. Satellite imagery taken in the days after the strike shows at least 4 buildings destroyed in quick succession. While one was well known to be associated with a Basij, surrounding structures appear to have been residential. Israel says it needs to establish a zone of control in the depopulated southern Lebanon to shield its own northern communities, which have faced daily rocket attacks since Iran-backed militant Hezbollah group joined the wider war. Dozens of families had lived in a multi-story apartment building in Resalat before it was destroyed by an Israeli airstrike on 9th March. The woman trapped in the rubble had been living in the complex with her husband and young daughter. Days after the strike, she and her daughter were found dead under the rubble. The husband survived. Another apartment building across the road was also destroyed in the airstrike. Since the start of the conflict, the Israel Defense Forces said it had dropped more than 12,000 bombs across Iran and 3,600 bombs on Tehran alone. U.S. Central Command says it has struck more than 9,000 targets across Iran.
The U.S. Senate has voted to end a partial 40-day government shutdown, approving funding for the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, with the exception of immigration enforcement. The almost 6-week funding lapse has seen knock-on disruption at U.S. airport. Security workers' salaries are paid by the DHS, and hundreds have quit since the shutdown began.
Democrats had refused to agree a funding deal without reforms to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, but the Senate reached unanimous agreement in the early hours of Friday. After stripping the U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency and parts of border protection out of the measure, it is hoped that package can bring an end to widespread disruption at airports across the U.S., where travelers have faced hours-long queues due to a shortage of Transportation Security Administration officers at security checkpoints. Around 50,000 agents at the TSA, which sits under the DHS, have been working without pay since mid-February due to the shutdown. This has reduced the number of turning up to work each day and led to hundreds quitting. A few hours before the Senate vote, U.S. President Donald Trump said on Truth Social that he would sign an executive order to immediately pay out the TSA agents. Also speaking after the vote, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said the package included funding for the TSA, U.S. Coast Guard, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He told the chamber that in pretty check for a lawless immigration and customs Democrats want any deal on DHS funding to include measures like the end of masks for the Immigration Customs Enforcement agents, a ban on racial profiling, and a requirement for judicial warrants before agents enter private property. The funding package now needs to pass a vote in the U.S. House of Representatives.
We observe a short break now and return for more stories for the World News on AIT.
The stories now break online. Don't miss anything from our real-time updates and exclusive content. Follow and participate in discussions on live TV studio programs to shape the narratives. Subscribe, engage, and share from AIT.live at AIT_online on X, AIT Online on Facebook, Official AIT Live on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads on YouTube. Stay connected with AIT. On air, online, on live.
Welcome back to more stories now from around Nigeria. In compliance with directives from Office of the National Security Advisor, NSA, the Bayelsa State Command of the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, NSCDC, has organized a stakeholders meeting on the protection of fiber optic cables and telecommunications infrastructure during construction activities. The State Commandant of the NSCDC, Matthew Palmer, represented by his second in command, Adeyinka Adeboye, notes that the stakeholders' engagement, as ordered by the Commandant General of the NSCDC, is to promote the adoption of the Call Before You Dig protocol in all excavation and civil works projects, as well as strengthen collaboration between NSCDC, state government, telecommunications operators, and other stakeholders.
The statutory lead agents mandated to protect critical national assets and infrastructure. The Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, Bayelsa State Command, remain committed to collaborating with all stakeholders to ensuring the protection of telecommunication infrastructures across the states.
People say to be forewarned is to be forearmed. So what we are doing is to forewarn them Because after this meeting, anyone we find contravening the law will take its course.
Taking input in the meeting were Federal Controller of Works, Bayelsa State representatives from the State Ministry of Communication, Science and Technology, and telecom operators.
So we're sure that we'll get people involved, because even the police and every other state agencies, they know that NSCDC is in charge of protecting ICT infrastructure across the country. And if there is a case that can protect the fiber cables, before somebody will be able to vandalize and get to that cable, maybe it will take him so much time. And if he's going to use excessive force, there will be an alarm. Maybe.
At the end of the celebration, stakeholders commended the NSCDC on its important role of securing critical national assets, suggesting a special task force to combat theft of telecoms infrastructure, just as the commandant warned vandals to desist forthwith, promising periodic stakeholders' engagement. An escalating environmental crisis in the Niger Delta is raising fresh concerns over the region's future as Pan-Niger Delta Forum, PANDEF, demands an immediate increase of the 13% derivation fund to 15 to 25%. At a press briefing in Abuja, former Attorney General Kanu Agabi warned that continued neglect and environmental degradation would worsen living conditions in affected communities as decades of oil exploitation leave livelihoods destroyed and government response inadequate.
Other key players urged urgent policy action, calling on the federal government and the lawmakers to respond decisively to the region's challenges.
The time has long since.
The 13% derivation fund, unchanged for over 27 years, is now under renewed scrutiny as environmental conditions in the Niger Delta continue to deteriorate. Former Attorney General of the Federation, Kanu Agabi, and other key players urged urgent policy action, calling on the federal government and the lawmakers to respond decisively to the region's challenges.
The time has long since passed when they should increase this minimum, take steps to increase the provision for derivation. As a first step, I would propose an increase to 25%.
That 25% is the minimum that we, the entire Niger Delta, have resolved to pursue.
Various regions should be allowed to tap their own resources.
The women of Niger Delta, we are suffering. Our children are suffering. Let the right thing be done. Let our gas fare penalty be paid.
Beyond the environmental concerns, the PANDEF leaders also raised political demands, backing the Southern Presidency, advocating state policing, and rejecting amnesty for terrorists.
It will resolve and advise that the southern part of Nigeria should produce the next president of Nigeria till 2031. The government should take the recommendation of most Nigerians for the creation of a state police as top priority.
Other stakeholders called for a return to the restructuring agenda as the forum inaugurated its Women's Committee. Itseme Ozekome, AIT News, Abuja.
All right, now to sports stories. On the world news, we have Nigeria Super Eagles that have defeated their Iranian counterpart 2-1 today at the Antalya Stadium in Turkey. Moses Simon scored after only 7 minutes as Nigeria took a 1-0 advantage at halftime. 3 goals heralded at the 2025 AFCON Akko Adams doubled Nigeria's lead within 5 minutes of the restart, while Mehdi Terami reduced the deficit for Iran. The encounter ended 2-1 with Nigeria emerging victor. Maduka Okoye made return to the squad in the absence of first-choice Stanley Nwabali. Rangers centre-back Emmanuel Fernandez made his debut alongside Chubuike Nwaiwu, while Uraso Collins, who plies his professional trade in the Belgian league with Janksat out on the march. The Super Eagles will next face Jordan on Tuesday. And that's the world news on AIT. Thank you for joining us. I am Onoshorena Obozege.